Hello everyone, that Manga Kid here to do a discussion video of Not Simple by Natsume Ono. This discussion video is going to be full of spoilers because I'm going to discuss this single volume manga in its entirety. So if you have not read it and you do not want any spoilers, I suggest going and checking out my review video that I did probably a few years ago now. But that one is decently spoiler free, but this one is going to go into the entire story in depth. So yeah. Also, if you've never read Not Simple and you just want to know everything about it, I am going to give the warning here at the beginning that this series involves a lot of very, very uncomfortable and disturbing topics of child prostitution and incest and just a lot of sexual assault that isn't shown. There's nothing explicitly shown, but these topics are discussed. These topics are things that, these things happen to the characters in this story. And we're basically seeing the life of our main character, Ian, and the people around him, and the decisions that the people around him are making that are very much affecting his life. And basically just this is a tragic story of this character. And so we start off at the beginning. I'm also going to say too, Not Simple is, I love Natsume Ono. I read quite often Natsume Ono's titles, but Not Simple is one that I read pretty much once a year. It's not a happy story, and I don't know why I'm drawn to it so much, but I come back to it every year and I read it. And so I've probably read this maybe 6 times at least. And I get something different out of it every time, which I think is important as well. But anyway, we start off at the beginning with our main character, Ian, dying. We start off, there's a girl who has a boyfriend, and I guess her father is very protective, and so he's, claimed he's going to kill her boyfriend, and she wants to elope with him. And so she decides, after meeting Ian, who she thinks is a homeless man on the street, that she is going to frame him as her boyfriend, so that the guys that are spying on her will see him with her and think, oh, that's her boyfriend, and then kill him or injure him. She doesn't think that her father is actually going to kill the boy. She thinks that he'll just gravely injure him, which is not really much better, but anyway, so that she can actually be with her boyfriend and her dad will think that he's handled the problem. So it starts off with Ian getting stabbed to death in a bathroom of a diner. And we learn that this girl, her mother, met Ian 3 years ago, and they agreed to meet at this diner in 3 years. And so she kind of realizes, oh my God, this is the guy, and it's my fault he's dead now. And then we meet our other main character, Jim, who is a reporter and Ian's best and pretty much only friend in his life. And so, the girl was told by her mom that it was her aunt that met Ian. She told this story of, that the aunt was running away from her family, and she met this guy at a diner and bought him a suit and fed him and was going to run away with him, but he convinced her to go back to her family. And, it turns out the mom was lying. It wasn't the aunt, who actually had passed away a year prior. So the girl told Ian, oh, that was my aunt. She died. And so he is dying on this bathroom floor thinking, well, there's nothing left for me to live for. This was the last thing I was living for. So he's not really interested in being saved. The girl comes to find out her mom was lying, and it was actually the mother who was very much alive. But by that point, Ian is far enough gone that there's really nothing they can do. And Jim is like, his last bit of luck ran out because of you. But that kind of kicks off the story of us, learning about this man's life. Ian's life through Jim, the reporter, because he says, I'm writing this guy's life story. Look for it on the shelves in about a year. It'll be published. So then we see, again, still in the present time, a couple people going like, oh, there's this book. The author disappeared. And, it's kind of weird because this book is very different from the author's other works. And in the end of the book, the author, the writer, the reporter guy kills himself. And Jim has gone missing. So we can infer that Jim has also killed himself after publishing Ian's story. And so it's just, it starts off pretty depressing, and it just continues on that route for the entire thing. So we see, now we're going to the past. We're seeing where this kind of all started. We see Ian's sister confronting their father about where Ian is. She just got out of prison. She tried to rob a store, armed robbery. They're also Australian, I should mention. So she was in prison for armed robbery, and she just got out, and her brother and her mom are missing. She finds out the parents got divorced and that the mother moved to England with Ian. And so she's desperate to get him back, and she's wondering why the father didn't, stop her. The mom is an alcoholic. Why would she get custody of Ian? Turns out the mom just took him and ran. And the father, we learn, has zero interest in the children at all. Like, he doesn't care about Ian at all. And so we then switch over to England, where we see that the mother is very much an alcoholic. She consistently spends all of the money on liquor, and Ian is, not being fed. He's not being taken care of. He's about 13 years old, but he's quite small. She finds out that her neighbor, this guy, is a pimp, and she goes, what can I do for you? And he says, nah, you're too old. And she goes, well, what about him? And so she basically pimps out her son to pay for her addiction. And so Ian is quite quiet. He's a little, he's quite reserved, and he doesn't really fully understand the complicated nature of what's going on. He's very naive and just kind of goes with the flow, and you can tell that he really, loves his mom, but he doesn't understand, what's happening. And so this guy, gives him gum afterward. So he pimps him out, and then he gives him gum as like a reward, and then the money goes to the mom. And so we see Ian kind of struggling with what's happening, because he can tell that he's uncomfortable, but he doesn't really know. He can't really tell anybody because there's nobody really to tell. And we don't see anything happening, but it's clear that was what was going on. So again, like I said, there's nothing explicit in this story that you're actually seeing anything horrible happening, but that the stuff is going on. And so eventually his sister does make it to England and comes to see him, and they're really happy to see each other. And the sister kind of realizes that she needs to take care of her mom. She doesn't know anything about the sex work and the child prostitution or anything, but she gets some money to send Ian back to Australia to live with the father, and she commits to taking care of the mom until she dies. She says, I'm taking responsibility. I've come to take full responsibility, for you and what's happened between us. But she wanted to get Ian out of the way, just so that, he didn't have to live in that scenario anymore. She wants to take that responsibility. So she tells him, do you have a goal? And, once you reach that goal, you can come we'll see each other again. And so, this is the part that I get really frustrated, because all the two of them want is to spend their lives together. She wants to see Ian, and he wants to see his sister, who he thinks is his mom, his real mom. And he's not wrong, but he has this, inkling as a child. He just has this feeling that he can't explain and doesn't understand why he thinks these things. But he's like, I'm pretty sure that my sister is my mom, and I just want to be happy with her, and I want my family to be happy and together. But he doesn't understand all the things that have gone on behind the scenes to make the situation what it is at this time. And so, he's trying to work towards his goal. He's a runner, so he wants to beat the record of some famous runner. And then once he does that, he can go see his sister again. But it's really frustrating because, life is way too short to set these barriers up between people. And I think that that's a huge thing about this story, is that we see with Jim, the reporter who is gay, we see him struggling to connect with his family, who he left behind because of his sexual orientation. I guess he got in a fight with his father and he left home, and we're just seeing a lot of pain. There's another gay guy that is Jim's neighbor who, he ran away from home, and we see that he kind of reconciles with his family a little bit. And we see Jim kind of going through the motions here throughout this entire story that takes place over many years of time, trying to reconcile his feelings, juxtaposed with Ian's plight of trying to reconnect with his sister and trying to deal with everything that's gone on in his life. So then we see how Jim and Ian met initially. So I'm assuming that Ian is probably a high school student here at this time, but he had a track meet and he got 4th place, and he was really, really celebrating, and everybody was confused as to why this kid who didn't even win was celebrating so much. And so he tells Jim his story, his promise with his sister, his, suspicion that his sister is actually his mom. And Jim decides not to publish his initial article he was supposed to publish on this kid, because he says, I'm going to keep this and I'm going to write about you. But at this time, it's just kind of a joke. But he's kind of like really starting to think about it. He's like, this guy's intriguing. And we can see that Jim probably has feelings for Ian, maybe not this early, but he's intrigued by him. But we see over the course of the story that Jim does, start to really like Ian. And not in a way that he's like coming on to him or anything, but just in that he's found somebody who is so, I guess, fascinating and intriguing to him that it kind of, the feelings of lust or love or caring friendship and like a muse, an artist and his muse, like all of those things, all those feelings are kind of mixed together. And then Ian, who is just like, you're the only person who's ever really been legitimately nice to me consistently. And so you're my best friend. And that's, important to me. So we see Ian popping in and out of Jim's life, basically. His sister he lost contact with his sister at some point, and he was told she went to America. And so he basically went to New York with Jim, started in New York, and then just started walking across the United States looking for his sister, because he has no leads, and he's just determined to find her. And so he pops in and out of Jim's life periodically. He shows up again, and this time in particular, he comes back right after meeting the woman who was from the beginning of the book that he met at the diner, who was going to run away with him, and he convinced her to go back to her family. He's got the suit, and he leaves it with Jim because he doesn't want it to get ruined, and he wants to wear it 3 years from now when he meets the woman again. But yeah, we're seeing, the neighbor I was talking about earlier, the other gay guy, saying like, oh, you clearly like him. And Jim is saying, he's a person who's unclouded by too much thought, someone who was simply himself and nothing more. And I think that just so encapsulates Ian, because he really doesn't think too much about anything. He's very honest and extremely naive, but very, very just like, I have this desire to go find her, so I'm just going to get on a plane, go to America, and I'm going to find her. And I'm going to do whatever it takes. And he is so 100% himself, and you see him throughout the book, telling people, I know I'm weird, I know you think I'm weird, everybody does. Yeah. And so then the two guys, Jim and the other guy, find out, I think his name's Rick, find out about the prostitution, just kind of in passing, and they realize that Ian doesn't fully understand what happened. He knows that it wasn't necessarily a good thing, but we find out that the pimp guy was sleeping with Ian as well. And he would give him lots of gum when he slept with him, and then he'd also give him gum when he slept with other people, for money, for his mom. And so, yeah, you just see that he doesn't fully comprehend what happened. And he says, oh, I just forgot about it until now. He was triggered by Rick handing him a piece of gum, and he was like, oh, no, I haven't earned that. And Rick was like, what do you mean, earned it? Yeah, so then we see, again, like I was mentioning earlier, Jim talking about or thinking about his family. And, Ian kind of brings up these thoughts in him because Ian is so desperately searching for that family, trying to reconcile everything that's happened and bring everybody back together. And whereas Jim is running away, he ignores the letters from his mom, he ignores the phone calls, and yeah, it's a very interesting comparison because everybody has their own reasons for wanting to either escape or wanting to reconnect. And I think it comes with time that sometimes our needs change. But like I was saying before, life is so short. And for the sister to make that decision for Ian, who was still a kid, 13 years old at the time, to say, okay, go back to Australia, I'm going to stay here, we'll reconnect at some point in the future. And unfortunately, they just never do. And Ian spends the rest of his life searching for her. But we find out that his sister actually died. She died in prison the second time. He goes to see his mom to find out what happened. And she says, you know I'm not your mother. She was your mother. And he gets the full truth. The thing that he's always kind of thought was that his father is his father, but his mom is his sister. And so obviously we find out that at 13 or 14 years old, the father had been raping his daughter and got her pregnant with Ian. And the mother says, she had you to get back at me. And I think that's such a twisted thing. To think that a 14-year-old or a 13-year-old, who was impregnated by her own father, just despite her mom had that baby. Like, no, what were her options? Could she have gotten an abortion? Like, was that available to her? What were her options? She didn't have the baby to spite you. She had the baby because she got pregnant by a man who should have never been near her in that way. And so the mom, took on the role of mother for him, even though she hated him, because he reminded her of what had happened. But yeah, so the mom basically says, you know what happened, tells him that she had tried to kill her boyfriend or something, which is why she was in prison, but then she got sick with pneumonia and died in prison. He goes to see his father, and who basically just says, I'm happy with my current family, and I don't want to ever see you again, so don't come near me. And so he's alone, and he goes back to Jim, and he just doesn't have any purpose or know really what to do. And he just, he says, what I really want is to feel the warmth of the people who should be closest to me. And it's just so heartbreaking, because if the sister had just decided what she had went there to do, take Ian away, and the two of them could have lived, but instead she felt the need to reconcile with her mother, which we find out she did do in the end. The mom says, we came back together and realized that there is love between us, but unfortunately at the cost of Ian and his feelings, because he never got to see his sister again, and that's all he really ever wanted. So anyway, he goes to see the sister's boyfriend because he wants to know what really happened, and he finds out that the sister's boyfriend is the pimp guy from his childhood. And so the sister tried to kill him when he told her everything about Ian and what had gone on. And so Jim runs out to go and see the guy, and he explains, I realized over time of dating the sister that there was this connection. He didn't know when he met her, but he found out, and he was like, I sat with the secret for a while, and then I decided to tell her. And, she tried to stab him to death. And so, yeah, turns out he also has HIV, that the sister contracted from him, which we assume turned into AIDS over time because it went untreated, and she died from pneumonia as a complication. He is infected, and Jim finds out that Ian also has HIV. And so basically, the last thing that Ian really has to live for is this woman that he promised to meet in 3 years. So he goes back, he gets his suit, gets on the train, and goes to meet her. And we know what happens. He meets the daughter instead, who frames him and ends up getting him killed. And then Jim, we know what happens to Jim as well. He writes his novel about Ian's life, and then we assume that he's also killed himself. But it's open-ended enough that you can make that inference, or you can say maybe he did just disappear. Maybe he went back to his family, And then we have the epilogue, which shows the initial meeting of the woman and Ian at the diner, and how he really did change the trajectory of her life by telling her she should go back to her family and be with these people, because he said, I'm out here walking across this country looking for my sister. What if your daughter ends up doing that? Don't make her feel those feelings. And then we're left at the very end of the book with just the picture of Jim holding Ian's hat, and he's just standing on the side of the road. And that's it. Not a happy book, but I think there's feelings of, missed connections and found family, but also just like secrets, and how not being honest with each other really, really can mess everything up pretty horribly. There's so many opportunities throughout this story, and just in life in general, for miscommunications to happen that have dire consequences. And in this case, you know, throughout his entire life, there are so many missed opportunities for people to just say what they're thinking or say what they mean, or be honest about what happened. That could have saved a lot of lives in this story. And I think that this story really kind of projects out that if there's somebody in your life that is important to you, keep them close and let them know that they're important. I think this story touches on forgiveness and reconciliation, because there's a lot of horrible things that happen. And I think that, you know, with Kylie, the sister, and her mom kind of reconciling their past and you know, rebuilding that relationship to whatever it could have been. Like, obviously it wasn't the perfect relationship even at the end, but it was more than it had ever been. But again, at the cost of Ian and his happiness. Because Ian could never stay in that home with technically his grandmother, because she doesn't want to see him. She cannot heal if he's there. But he can't heal without them. And Kylie couldn't heal without Ian. And it was just a horrible puzzle of people that the pieces just never fit together. And it would have been very much impossible for them to all live happily ever after in the same space. And I think that that's so sad. But I think there are families like that where, you know, I live over here, this person lives over there, and I can see this person, but I can't see these two people when they're together because they don't get along, or I don't get along with one of them. And it's just all of these little nuances. And it comes down to, in this story, choosing one person over the other, because inevitably they don't end up reconnecting, because Kylie made her choice to stay with the mom, and for some reason had this naive thought that she was going to see Ian again, and at some point something went wrong, and she decided to move to the States without telling Ian and without giving him any kind of direction of where she is or how to reconnect with her. And that part is kind of a mystery of, like, what happened, what made her do that. Did she think that Ian would be better off? I'm just not really sure. But yeah, Not Simple is a very quick read. It is a very, I don't want to say straightforward, because it's really not a straightforward story, but it does have the appearance of being a very simple story, but it is not. It's much more complicated than that, and that's the whole point. The whole point of the title, the whole point of the story that Jim writes about this guy's life. It is not simple. There are so many complicated nuances to it, and yeah. There must be a reason I come back to this story every year, because it doesn't make you feel good, but there's something about it that just makes me appreciate relationships, and really think about, you know, your place in the world and what your purpose is. And there's something so charming about the art that I think fits the story really, really well. And I think if you've never read Not Simple and you can handle the difficult topics that it covers, that I do recommend reading it. It's definitely one of Natsume Ono's works that is more, I guess, less accessible to people, because it is so, like, starkly depressing. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say for now. Thank you for watching. If you've read Not Simple, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. If there's anything that I said that you don't agree with, or that you interpreted differently, or, you know, had additional thoughts on, I would love to know. Obviously, since the video is full of spoilers, comments will probably also be full of spoilers, so, you know, say what you need to say about the story. I'd love to hear how this story has affected you, if in any way. But yeah, thanks for watching.